The autonomic nervous system is divided into three parts: the sympathetic nervous system, the parasympathetic nervous system, and the enteric nervous system. The autonomic nervous system controls the smooth muscles of the intestines, internal organs, and the glands. The preganglionic neuron is located either in the brain or in the spinal cord. Note that the somatic nervous system has only one neuron between the central nervous system and the target organ, while the autonomic nervous system uses two neurons. Due to its location in the body, the nervous system consists of two parts: the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system. The central nervous system (CNS) includes the nerves in the brain and spinal cord. It is safely contained in the skull and spinal canal of the spine. All other nerves in the body are part of the peripheral nervous system (PNS). It is a complex neural center with multiple nerve tracts between the cerebrum, spinal cord, cerebellum, and the motor and sensory functions of the head and neck. It consists of the medulla oblongata, the part responsible for heart and breath control, the midbrain, which is involved in basic, involuntary bodily functions, and the pons, from which some cranial nerves emerge. The CNS consists of the brain, the cranial nerves, and the spinal cord. It covers the brain, brainstem, spinal cord, nerves, and ganglia, and is divided into the peripheral nervous system (PNS) and the central nervous system (CNS). Parasympathetic nerves emerge from the skull as fibers from the eyes, facial, glossopharynx, and vagus nerves, and from the sacral region of the spinal cord. The PNS consists of the somatic nervous system (SNS), which controls all enteric activities, and the autonomic nervous system (ENS), which controls regulatory activities. The sympathetic neurons have their cell bodies in the chest and lumbar region of the spinal cord and are connected to the paravertebral chain of the sympathetic ganglia. The nerves that transmit sensory information from the periphery to the CNS are either spinal nerves connected to the spinal cord or cranial nerves connected to the brain. The sensory fibers connect to the spinal cord via the back root, which is attached to the ganglion of the back root. Sensory information from the body that is transmitted via the spinal nerves is projected onto the opposite side of the brain and processed by the cerebral cortex. The cranial nerves can be strictly sensory fibers, such as the olfactory, optic, and vestibulocochlear nerves, or mixed sensory and motor nerves, such as the trigeminal, facial, glossopharynx, and vagus nerves. Spine information is contralateral. Cranial nerve systems are mostly ipsilateral, which means that a cranial nerve on the right side of the head is connected to the right side of the brain. Some cranial nerves only contain sensory axons, such as the olfactory, optic, and vestibulocochlear nerves. Other cranial nerves contain both sensory and motor axons, including the trigeminal, facial, glossopharynx, and vagus nerves, but the vagus nerve is not associated with the somatic nervous system. The somatic nervous system includes the sensory and motor nerves that innervate the limbs and the body wall. Sensitive nerve fibers in the peripheral nerves are the peripheral axonal process of neurons in the dorsal root ganglion. The motor axons are the processes of the anterior horn cells of the spinal cord. Generally, spinal nerves contain afferent axons from peripheral sensory receptors, such as the skin, mixed with efferent axons that migrate to the muscles or other effector organs. When the spinal nerve approaches the spinal cord, it splits into dorsal and ventral roots. The dorsal root contains only the axons of the sensory neurons, while the abdominal roots contain only the axons of the motor neurons. Some of the branches are synchronized with local neurons in the dorsal root ganglion, in the posterior dorsal horn, or even in the anterior ventral horn at the level of the spinal cord into which they enter. Sensory neurons are unique and have one axon that extends to the periphery and another axon that extends into the central nervous system via the dorsal root. Figure 3. The cell body of this neuron is located in the dorsal root ganglion, or one of the sensory ganglia of the sensory cranial nerves. Before a sensory signal can be passed on to the nervous system, it must be converted into an electrical signal in a nerve fiber. The somatic nervous system includes all neurons that are connected to muscles, skin and sensory organs. The somatic nervous system processes sensory information and controls all voluntary muscle systems in the body with the exception of the reflex arches. The somatic nervous system consists of efferent nerves that are responsible for sending brain signals for muscle contraction. The somatic nervous system is responsible for our conscious perception of the environment and for our voluntary reactions to this perception using skeletal muscles. Peripheral sensory neurons receive input from environmental stimuli, but the neurons that cause motor responses come from the central nervous system. The distinction between the structures, that is the anatomy, of the peripheral and central nervous systems and functions, that is the physiology, of the somatic and autonomous systems can be demonstrated most simply by a simple reflex effect. The regulation of urine storage and drainage is very complex with the involvement of many structures of the central nervous system. In theory, bladder dysfunction can be episodic, with intermittent acute symptoms that can complicate the diagnostic process.